I lived through being wounded in combat in Afghanistan. I was kind of searching, like, why did I live while others died? Yeah, I'm terminal. So I have terminal cancer. This is my last, firefight. This is my last hurrah. It's at the impact that is more important than spending more time with my family. My wife and I are all in on this.
And you started going through your own personal journey in order to be able to learn a lot of these things.
What we have right now in the standard practice is failing my brothers. Put them on any battlefield in the world and they would succeed. You put them in a battlefield of the bedroom alone, they took their lives.
You're sitting at 100% success rate.
Yeah, we have had 0 relapses to date.
I think the average for a rehab is what, 7%?
It's less than that. Most clinics and rehab facilities do not track past 6 months.
Spirituality and capitalism belong together. Those thoughts, those feelings, that comes from something bigger than I am. And together I believe we can all grow. That's how we're going to change the world. That's how we're going to change the planet.
I am extremely excited today about having you here on the Spiritual Capitalist podcast and the YouTube program that we've been running for a little while now. And the reason being is because I'm sitting here with Brenden Borrowman, and I just had the opportunity to experience one of the most unique experiences I've had in a really long time. And I want to show you guys something. Let me see this real quick. This right here, I believe, after experiencing what I just went through, which I'll explain in a moment, I believe that we could actually be sitting with a piece of technology that could not just change humanity, but it could change people's mental awareness. It really, I think, could potentially be the cure for addiction, potentially be the cure for PTSD, anxiety, ADD, all through a video game. I wouldn't have believed this either if I hadn't just experienced this. I don't know. I'm still kind of sitting in awe after I went through this. So just to give you an idea, I just put this headset on, and Brenden walked me through this process where I was climbing a mountain. And what was cool about this, that this is using AI, and it is literally changing the setting, it's changing the sound, it's changing the day. It's adapting based upon myself, and what it's doing is it's putting me in this situation that's creating blood flow. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about blood flow. We're going to talk about how this could actually change the planet and the world. And I'm really excited about having you here and just honored. So I really appreciate it.
I'm honored for you having me, brother.
Thank you, man.
It's been a long time coming.
It has. So we've known each other for about a decade, right?
2014.
Okay. So
a decade.
Yeah. So in that process of you and I knowing each other that long, I've watched you evolve and change, and we kind of lost track of each other. And recently we're brought together by a friend of ours that was running this event in Park City called the Breakfast Palooza. And you started sharing with me with what you were doing. And I was saying, hey, listen, I've got this show. I've been involved with Cradle. I've been doing all kinds of things. And one of the things I'm extremely passionate about is addiction, is how do we eradicate, how do we start to change the conversation around addiction? How do we change people's experience with addiction? Like, how do we get rid of this? I mean, fentanyl right now has been taking over the planet. We've got over, I believe, like 100,000 people a year that are dying, and it might even be higher than that. From
it's
overdose.
Closer to 200 now.
Oh, excuse me.
It's an epidemic at scale.
It is. And one of the things that I didn't know about you is that you're like kind of a secret weapon. And what I mean by that is that there's celebrities and there's people, and you were actually kind of outed recently about this, that are looking to solve the problem of addiction. And you have worked with how many people now?
94 is what I'm graduating this month.
94.
My
now,
94th patient.
So you have 94 patients you've worked with. You've been using what we're going to get into in a second, but you've been utilizing different technologies, different modalities. And what you told me is that you're sitting at 100% success rate.
Yeah, we've had 0 relapses to date.
I mean, I think the average for a rehab is what, 7%?
It's less than that. Most clinics and rehab facilities do not track past 6 months. Into their 6-month window, it doesn't pass 15%. National average, I believe, is sitting right around 13. Last time I looked at it was 2021, which is probably worse now after COVID. the model has not evolved since Prohibition. The book of AA, what everybody, AA, the steps, we were lobotomizing people when that was created. It was not
Right.
created by a professional, and we haven't evolved. And when I say evolved, yeah, people are throwing out buzzwords, you know, or neurocognitive therapy, EMDR. The issue is that we look at the illness as a willpower mental health issue, right? That's the conversation mental health. What we're not discussing and what is not being pushed to the forefront is the physical injury to the body when it comes to trauma, when it comes to addiction, when it comes to PTSD. There's a physical injury. Blood flow imbalance is a physical injury. It mirrors and it monitors TBI. So people are like, oh, TBI and PTSD share commonality of symptoms. Well, yeah, because that's the same injury concept when it comes to blood flow imbalance of the brain. So not only did we identify that, but we identified how to restore blood flow with manual therapy. Once blood flow is restored, we move forward in modalities of therapy to get the patient to where they succeed.
So I want to get in that in a second, which I appreciate you just kind of giving us a little bit of an overview on that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you and I are working together in the past, we were working on a handful of different business projects, and then we lost track of each other, right? And at that moment in time, I went one direction and you went another direction, which I always find fascinating how much we can get done in a long period of time and how little we can get done in a short period of time. Like we just don't realize that. But what did you end up doing when you and kind of, we split, we went this way and then you started going another direction because you served with the military.
Yep.
And from what I understand is you started seeing a lot of your brothers start to commit suicide, PTSD. We're going through some pretty heavy things that way.
Yeah, so I ran my 20th loss. I said the system is failing. What we have right now in the standard practice is failing my brothers. They can you put them on any battlefield in the world and they would succeed. You put them in a battlefield of the bedroom alone and they took their lives. I wanted to know why. Why were we failing? We have all the money in the world for pharmaceutical medication, all the money in the world for their crap therapy the VA has. Why was it failing my guys? It's not an issue of pipeline or waiting 6 months to get an appointment. That came after I started. When I was starting, you get an appointment almost same week. The issue is the quality of care. You can't willpower or talk somebody out of a situation. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but we know now when the brain's not able to truly process it. So when I started the process, I wanted to know what was truly happening, my friends. What was the injury? What was the mechanic that was keeping them from being able to move forward? Through that, I started reading every piece of information I could get. And I found my partners, Dr. Alina Fong, Dr. Mark Allen at Cognitive Effects, with a business partner of mine at the time, Wendell Smith. Wendell and I opened a drug rehab to treat his son. His son failed. I think it was his third program. He didn't know what to do. He's like, you were in the military, take him up to the mountains and just beat the hell out of him. And I laughed. And I was like, nah, we'll see. Like, that's illegal, but let's see what we can do. The boot camp saved my life. Maybe an initial wilderness thing might help him. We started kind of that process. And I was like, we're missing, there's got to be something cognitive here. Like, let's start looking at the brain. We found Alina and Mark, met with them, told them our thesis and our idea, and they agreed to do our brain scans. And through that, we identified the same TBI brain scans they were looking at when it came to physical trauma, car accidents, bomb exposure, mirrored that of people who had no TBI but had addictions. And then we started looking at people with PTSD, and it mirrored across the board of the injury. And so we were like, okay, so instead of treating this as a willpower or a spiritual or just an experience, let's treat the mechanic of injury of the blood flow first. So we found modalities of therapy, manual therapies, occupational therapies that restored blood flow and rebalanced the brain. And then we coupled that afterwards with modalities therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, neuro-linguistic programming. And we started seeing that everybody was able to move forward. They were able to absorb the information and progress through the trauma state because they were actually able to process what they were experiencing. The issue with talk therapy is you're talking to somebody and they can't process what they're going through. So you get somebody in an hour to a state of unburdening, and then the appointment's over. I'll see you in a week, or I'll see you in a couple days. And they leave and they're stuck in that space of trauma. They're not able to move forward. They're not able to resolve where they're at. And so you end up creating a resistance to that piece. So long-term therapy is damaging people because they're becoming resistant, patient resistant to the process because their brain's not able to truly work through the issue to recover. And, you know, it's stupid. Trauma's trauma. Like, There's some people that are like, I haven't had any trauma. Well, most traumatic thing to you is the most traumatic thing to you. You can't judge yourself based off of others. You know, it's not a veteran issue. This is a humanity issue. And so I went all in on the brain. I left that drug rehab and focused specifically in the celebrity addiction space. And then I worked through that. I obtained my PhD in 2019, continued to work through it through COVID. And then Aaron Carter OD'd before he was able to come to me. And that kind of outed me as this hidden celebrity coach, right? Addiction coach. And it took me into kind of the limelight. And at the same time, thankfully, I was scaling because it's very expensive. It's time expensive, but it's also financially unreasonable for most people in America, if not the world. And I wanted an affordable platform for easeability. And so I started shifting my business into virtual reality and AI components to not only diagnose, but to treat without me having to be involved. And so we decided to gamify it. And so while I got outed in the celebrity space, I'm graduating my last patient right now in that space. I won't be taking any more and putting everything into our platform for scalability so we can start making impact around the world.
Love that. I love one. That's what I love about entrepreneurship. I love the fact that you saw a problem, that you saw your brothers committing suicide. And you saw that people were having horrific experiences by being like deep in the addiction. And a lot of people look at things and they say, this is the way it is. Like, this is the way it is. Like, this is how it's always been. Therapy is the way. Maybe nutrition. Maybe we put them up in the mountains and beat the shit out of them. Like, whatever this thing is, right? But you kept doing that, and people keep doing the same thing over and over and over, right? And they're expecting some kind of different results, and this isn't happening. And you, somehow or another, you say, you know what? This isn't working. I'm going to think about this in a different way from your education, your background, whatever it may be. There was something very curious about you to say, what can I do differently to be able to make things different? Not what can I continue to do the same way? And so I believe that as entrepreneurs, we are always, and visionaries, we are always looking to say, here's a problem, and how do we come about it a different way? And when you and I were talking, you have also experienced some of the same amount of traumas that your brothers have experienced, and you started going through your own personal journey in order to be able to learn a lot of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in the muse, right? So like a lot of artists have like, I tapped into the muse and I manifested it. I didn't believe in it at first, but there's a piece that like there's something you dial into with a good idea. There's something that you tune into with a great idea. The work that you do in order to make that idea come to fruition is manifestation. You can't just say, I'm going to manifest success and then nothing comes of it. I looked at it as I'm going to heal my brothers and I'm going to heal myself from the trauma that we've gone through, but I'm going to do the work to do it.
Right.
And the idea hit and I focused in on the idea, but I did all of the work to get through the idea where it manifested into an end state, a product, a company. That's what I love about entrepreneurs, because it's almost like artists. You can meet an artist and entrepreneur, and even though you're a CEO of a Fortune 500, if you're the founder, there's something in you that jives with the guy that's there to paint for the benefit. There's a connection point of like you both tied into something, and you both worked hard to get your result. That is missing in a lot of people you meet that aren't entrepreneurs.
Well, it's often the trauma that leads to the impact. Right? Mm-hmm. We talked about earlier about impact, right? It's that trauma that you go through that leads to the impact, because many people that will start a business, many entrepreneurs will start a business, and they'll say, hey, this is just about the money, right? And we talked earlier about, basically people over profit.
Yeah, the dumb buzzword. It's a campaign slogan.
Right.
Yeah, it's impact over profit. If you have a great impact, which means you have a great product, which means you'll have great profit. But if you're not focused on your impact, if you're focused on your product, or if you're focused on your profit margin, you're going to miss your impact point. And through my process, I'm more concerned about my impact. And we've talked about this. This is my last firefight, so to say. It's my Alamo.
Yep.
I'm going to eradicate veteran suicide before I go. That is my goal. That's my mission statement. That's my impact point. We went from 20, everybody's heard the buzzword, 22 a day. We had 22 veterans a day commit suicide. Then COVID happened, and now the number's 49. We more than doubled the epidemic statistic in the veteran community. It's not just a veteran issue. Childhood suicide is on the rise. Family suicide with mom or dad. I mean, it's on any marginalized level you can look. Suicide numbers are up. They haven't dropped anywhere. There's not one industry. There's not one data stream like, oh, it's down in this group. Everything's up, and it's continuing to scale. And so I looked at it as like, okay, if financials are a breaking point for people, let's make it affordable. Let's make it scalable. Resistance is a giant thing when it comes to treatment. Patient resistance, or you hear pharmaceutical resistant, right? Medication resistance. Resistance is the gatekeeper to progress. We put it in a state of play. There is no more resistance. You got to experience the environment, not even for a full hour. You were in it for less than 10 minutes.
Yeah, it was interesting. I got nauseous. The environment started to change. I was climbing. My body was shaking. There was a lot of, as you were saying to me, there was like tightness in my neck and my ears. There was a lot of like blood flow going on, which is really interesting to me, this whole concept of blood flow in the brain, right? So if we look going back to addiction or trauma, what you were sharing with me earlier today is that when the brain itself doesn't have a lot of blood flow, then it starts to cause a lot of problems in the body. I was like, well, this is interesting. I've never really kind of thought about, okay, blood flow, is this actually helping us or is it not? And it would make sense if the whole system has blood going through it, the heart and all the veins and moving into the brain. Okay, that makes sense. But then how did you discover or come to the conclusion that, listen, like addiction and PTSD and trauma and all of these things are simply a lack of blood flow going on in the brain?
Well, it's not just a lack. So let's explain blood flow and the issue. So let's take it back to how we've evolved as human beings. If we go back to caveman times and I witness my child get eaten by a cat, I have to move through that. When we talk, everybody's talking about the fight, flight, or freeze, that emotional state, that survival state, the lizard brain. To move past that point of trauma, you had to have moved through that to procreate, to move the genome forward, right? So we've created this process that's an automatic response to trauma, whether it be physical or emotional, environmental. Trauma happens and our body responds to it to protect us, to help us move forward through it. Whether that's fight, flight, freeze, whatever the state is, your body it's an automatic response. We don't have a response to automatically restore that blood flow. Because back then you weren't living into your 30s or 40s.
Right.
You were dying off young. As we've evolved, we've cultivated our environment to make ease of life easier for us, but we haven't cultivated that part of our brain for response accuracy. So you go back to any war, they have plenty of nicknames and terms for PTSD. It's very prevalent. The longer you live, the more these start to spiral out of control. We've gotten to a point where we're now living to be over 100. So we're now seeing giant impacts from the Vietnam era, the World War II, coming into now the global war on terror, where people are living longer, and you're starting to see the spiral effects of imbalanced blood flow of the brain. So what happens is the blood flow in the brain it's a finite response or a resource. If we experience trauma, it's going to put us in survival state. We lose some of our cognitive functioning, we lose some of our emotional reasoning, and we shift blood. So some parts of our brains have an overproduction of blood flow. That stimulus thought is over what a normal baseline is, then other areas of the brain are understimulated. So what happens, you go from a grouping of blood flow, a well-oiled machine, to now it's sporadic. What we do and what our system, our protocols does is regroups that blood flow to a healthy baseline. Once your blood flow is regrouped, you're able to cognitively start working through the processes. You can cognitively work through your trauma. You can cognitively work through PTSD or reasonings like, spatial mapping awareness. All of these symptoms throughout the day. A lot of addicts I work with are like, well, when I took the drug, I felt good and normal. You'll hear this a lot if you've worked with addicts. When you start talking, like, why did you start? Well, when I took meth the first time, I felt great. I felt like Superman. It's the best experience of my life.
I've heard this many times from addicts.
What happens when you take those drugs is your body for a moment is rebalancing blood flow. So you're operating at a higher state. What happens is the body builds resistance and tolerance to the drug. You have to take more and more to get that hit. And any addict I've ever worked with said that the second, the third, the fourth, I'm always chasing that high I felt the very first time. Well, what happens when we reconfigure your blood flow? All of my patients said it's like my first high the first time, but it's consistent. I can now work through issues. You can't start work and processing a thought if the computer's broke. If If I go tell you, go jump on Word and write me an essay. If the computer doesn't turn on, you can't do it. The blood flow is not balanced. You're not going to be able to get the processor. So we're trying to do step 4, step 5 right now is process and protocol. And we're failing because we're not doing the reconfiguration at the beginning. And that's what my entire company, what I focus on is that initial step. Let's get the brain operating healthy again. Let's get it to where we can process. And then let's go through the processes of what modality works for the individual.
And then starting to move through those modalities to get them in a operating better, seeing things better, maybe able to deal with that trauma that's still there. Because you wouldn't say if we move the blood flow, the trauma goes away.
No, but you can process and handle your trauma. My events happen to me, the firefights, the death, the destruction of war, that I have to live with what I did. I have to live with what I experienced, what we went through, but it doesn't control me anymore. There's no fear attached. I'm numb to the memories. The memories don't hold a grasp over me like they did before, because now I can process the emotion. I can process the event. It's not a chasing bear anymore. It's just like, yeah, that happened. It's a chapter, but now I'm on my next chapter.
It occurred.
Yeah,
it was part of your life, but it's no longer defines who you are.
Yeah, you're not stuck in it.
Yeah.
The best thing I can explain with PTSD leads into addiction and everything else is you get stuck. In a chemical level, you're stuck on the event. You can't move past it. The worst is when someone's stuck on an event that they have muted out, right? They don't really remember what happened to them or the trauma, but the feeling of the trauma, you get stuck. You get paused.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of addicts get stuck in that moment. They get stuck in that position, and the only relief they have is the substance of use that they choose, and they become addicted because it takes them out of that moment.
Which is hell. I mean, that experience. We were talking earlier about, different medicines, and when I say medicines, I'm talking about psychedelics and so forth. The only way I can compare that to is I have had thoughts in my mind that are continual, right? I'm like, oh, I can't stop thinking about this. Like, this is driving me a little bit nuts. And all I'm doing is focusing on that. Now, I don't think I've ever had PTSD, right? I've never served in the military, never had some of those horrific things happen, but I do know people that have not served in the military, they still suffer from PTSD, whether it be domestic abuse and a handful of other things. But what I have noticed is that when I will utilize something like medicine in ayahuasca, which just was recently in Costa Rica and experienced that again, there'll be places inside of those journeys where a thought will come up, beep, and when that thought comes up, it just rolls around and around, and I cannot get out of it. It's constant, consistent. It's like nagging, and it never, ever ends, right? Like it just keeps going on and on. And so that's a lot of times what I have seen in that thought, right? And so I'm wondering if is that similar to what we're describing as PTSD, that thought just continuing to nag and go on and on and on?
PTSD has been co-opted by the military community because when you think PTSD, you think war.
Right.
I want you to redefine your definition of PTSD. PTSD is the post-traumatic stress disorder, right? They use PTS now, post-traumatic stress. Traumatic, the T of that, doesn't have to be war. It just has to be trauma. That could be anything from domestic violence, sexual assault, whatever, but it can be as innocuous as when I was 12, my parents didn't show up to my assembly. Because to the individual, that's the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to them. It doesn't take away from that individual's trauma. Because that individual, yourself may be included, you're judging your trauma experience to your environment. You're judging your trauma to me going to war. Well, if you judge it on that game, you're never going to win because you're going to be like, well, I've never experienced anything traumatic. But it's not true. You have experienced trauma to your level, to your experience in this life. What you have walked, what you've experienced is your trauma, your baggage. It's your viewpoint. But if you're so busy judging that off of other people's trauma and trauma that they've published or they talk about or they've written a book about or maybe you saw a documentary on, if you're judging your trauma and your standard to that, you're never going to measure up, which means you're never going to acknowledge your trauma. You're never going to move forward. It makes me sad that we have gotten to a place where we minimize other people's trauma. And you see this in the world of like the one-up game, right? Someone will share to a friend what their trauma is, and they're like, well, I had this happen to me. And it's like, I gotta do this one up. We marginalize what that person may experience. It's goofy to say, but if the most traumatic event to happen to somebody is that their parents didn't show up when they were a kid to an assembly and they're looking around, they weren't there, and then they forget about it because it's like, oh, that's not trauma. That's not war. My parents didn't show up to an assembly, and you're an adult, and you're like, that doesn't bug me. That might be the thing you're stuck on. The issue is in that moment when you were a kid or an adult or whatever, whenever the event happens, your brain, to survive the moment, goes, let's push some blood into some different areas to get through this. But it didn't automatically go back. So then let's add another event. Girlfriend stands you up, or you have a bad breakup when you're 16. Your blood shifts a little bit more.
So the blood,
So it's
you're
compounding.
telling me that these moments, the brain is actually acting by utilizing blood to push it through the brain to be able to, like, what is the response of this?
You're,
Like, why
you're
is it doing
surviving
this?
through the moment, that lizard state brain, right? You're surviving through the moment, which means we're shutting off processes of logical thought. We're more emotionally driven. We're trying to get through the moment because your body is responding to pain. There's a pain response. When you have a heartbreak, you break up with somebody, you lose somebody, you feel that pain in your chest. It's a physiological response to the stress that you're computing in the moment, that you're intaking. You have a physiological response. What happens is those resources get pushed out without manual intervention. They don't go back. So you have compounding effect over time. It could be small, innocuous things over time that add up to where now you're in a place of depression. You're like, how the hell did I get here? I'm in hell. Why am I here? Why am I stuck? Well, you probably have an imbalance of blood flow. Let's rebalance that, and then let's help you process through an event through modalities of therapy. That's what a therapist is there for.
So are you, because when we talked earlier, are you saying that PTSD, ADD, addiction, I mean, we could name all of these different things off, depression, is really mainly caused by lack of blood flow in the brain itself?
So lack of blood flow is because it's an imbalance of blood flow, right?
Okay.
It's an imbalance of function. So the best way to explain this, let's take, you have an engine, okay? Let's say you're a V12, V8, whatever, and 3 of your cylinders aren't firing. Is it going to run to its optimal level? No. We go in there, we clean them out, we get them operating again, you're going to perform to your highest level. What's happening is with an imbalance of blood flow, not an underbalance or overbalance, imbalance, highs and lows, not grouped together, you're going to experience and respond to treatment or environmentals or whatever in different ways. ADD kind of gets lumped in there, but it's not ADD is not something that I have looked at in research. Right. I have looked at depression. I've looked at drug addiction. I've looked at PTSD. We've looked at TBI. All of these cluster around the same issues with once the blood flow is rebalanced and operating at a good point, the success of therapy and modalities moving forward has been 100%.
Wow.
And I look at 100% as critical relapse with addiction, right?
Yep.
Like someone goes out and they fall back into their addiction. That's a relapse. I don't look at like sadness as a relapse because you're going to have your highs and lows, but it's how you respond to those highs and lows and you move forward. But we haven't had anybody go back to their drug of choice or behavior of choice. It's filling a gap.
I don't think there's anybody on the planet. So like I know quite a few people in this space. And what I mean by that is, therapists and top therapists from some really big rehab centers. They can't say this. The numbers you're saying, nobody can say. With 100% success rate, like, I love the fact that you, instead of saying, I'm just going to keep making more and more money, you said, you know what? Like, I know people can't afford this. This is a year's process. It's a couple $100,000. Like, this is not something that the average family is going to be able to afford. But instead, you took and you put it into this.
Yep.
You figured out a way. It's how can we create blood flow by utilizing technology? How can we create blood flow by using AI? And to see what it did for me when I was using it just for a brief moment, I was like, whoa, that was pretty intense. And you're like, yep, that was 10 minutes. And we do this for an hour. And what I find even more fascinating now is that you're working with the Department of Defense, correct? And you're not just working on this, but you're working on figuring out a way is how do you make people more optimal? Like, how do you make them more better at what they're doing? Because now they have more blood flow going to their brains, they're going to be able to perform better. And I think about it from a perspective of an athlete, entrepreneurs, anybody that's really having to demand a lot of their brain or their body to utilize this technology. It's fascinating. Here you go, to give this back to you. But one of the things I find more even fascinating about it than just the technology is you as a human being. Recently, I was having a conversation with one of our friends, and they let me know that right now that like this experience, this business may be your last business, and not from perspective is you're not going to be able to, create another business because obviously you could, but there's a lot more to the story than that.
Yeah, I'm terminal, so I have terminal cancer. This is my last, firefight. This is my last hurrah, and it's at the impact that is more important than spending more time with my family. My wife and I are all in on this. This is bigger. The reason we named our company Axios and not Brenden Incorporated is because it's bigger than me. It's bigger than my family. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than anybody we've talked to because we're talking about a human issue. This is an impact point that doesn't just help veterans. It doesn't just help, people with depression. It helps everyone. I don't know one person, one family right now that doesn't have issues in the home from a mental health perspective. I could have made a lot of money just staying in the celebrity addiction space and been comfortable. It made me sick. Like you can ask my wife, there are days where I would isolate from my wife and kids because I had to tell parents no. Well, you can't afford it, and I can't take them because it costs a certain amount. You can't even meet the cost point. And I hated that feeling. I hated the gut feeling of coming home and telling my wife, like, yeah, this is what happened today. Because I have the answers. I know how to help you, but I can't go out of my own pocket to pay for you to go through it. So how do I take all of that, make it scalable, palatable, and in a form of media that is easily adaptable to where you don't have to be walked through it with a therapist? Well, games. There's been plenty of studies on what games do for the white matter, the brain, the human connection. I was like, well, I got to put the body under stress. So VR, I can't do it through a desktop. I got to have the body moving. So let's do virtual reality. We started there. Let's do a test to see if we can make the needle move. The needle move, we're like, awesome. Let's double down on the modalities with game features. The needle move, we're like, we're on to something. And now we've gone from a couple $100,000 process to it's a headset and a cost of video game. And so Axios has 3 pillars, right? We have our neuro training, which is what you experienced. We were building a commercial video game, so think Call of Duty and VR. And then we're building therapy spaces to enable and support therapists through telehealth, where Buddy is identifying parts of the session, helping the therapist identify through telehealth, instead of like Zoom, how they can impact and help the patient more, how they can increase their performance. And also gives the patient an engagement point with, instead of being on Zoom or texting, they're in an environment where they can engage and get blood flow movement while they're working through therapy with the therapist. All of that is bigger than what I could be doing for my last moments as someone with terminal cancer. I believe this is what we met each other a decade ago, and I had 3 businesses going, stressed out of my mind, doing the rat race as an entrepreneur, but I never felt fulfilled. I never felt happy. You feel like that empty happiness, but I never felt like that. This is what I meant to do, because I lived through being wounded in combat in Afghanistan. I was kind of searching, like, why did I live while others died? My first time treating somebody, and we got done with the process, and their parents refused to even acknowledge them. And at the end, they're a family unit, and they were moving forward. And 6 months later, hey, I have a consistent job. And then a year later, I'm married. And a couple of years after, I have a baby. Like, all those moments, I told my wife, like, this is it. Like, if I didn't have to worry about money, this is all I'd do. If money wasn't an object, it would be this. Because I come from a broken home family where it's like, I'm seeing the reconnection points that can be made when the tribe, the unit decides to move forward with this process together. And it gives me so much hope. Whereas before I was running away from it. Now I use this with my wife and my kids. Like I finally have security and safety. Like I have a marriage and a wife that I trust implicitly. Like it's not a sense of like where we're at. Like I have the dream relationship that I always wanted with my spouse, and we cultivated that together by using some of these modalities, processes, just applying them in our own lives. It's not something I should just keep to myself and let come to my grave. Let's build a process that's bigger than Brenden, scalable, and get it out there. And I can die with a smile on my face.
I love that, man. How do you so I know that we're all dying, right? Like tomorrow morning, I don't know if I'm going to be here. It's facts. We just don't know. Like the time is always ticking against us. But when you're terminal and you know that like this is At least this is what they're saying. Now, do I always believe that personally? Maybe. I believe there's a lot of technology. I believe there's a lot of things with spirit. I believe there's a lot of things that can change that. So when I say this, I don't think that, I mean, you could be around for another, till you're 90 if all I know.
Yep.
Doesn't mean that you're going to. But how do you deal with that within yourself? Like, how does that, like when you hear that, because I've never heard that before, like how do you deal with that within yourself to be like, okay, you just said it. You're like, listen, I'm terminal cancer. Like one day or another, this is when it's going to happen. Like, how do you deal with that inside yourself?
I got really lucky with a perspective from war. Because when I got wounded, I should have died. So every day after that was bonus time. And I talked about this when we met, and I wasn't even sick in 2014 when we met. Right. But I always talked about I'm on bonus time. I hate when everyone's like, oh, you're terminal. Well, so are you. We're born terminal. The moment we come into existence on this plane and this experience that we're lucky to be humans in, you're terminal. You could die the very night you get hit by lightning, you get hit by a car, you know, an aneurysm can pop in your brain. You can die sitting at your office desk. Everybody is terminal. No one's getting out of this permanently alive. You're going to die. I just got really lucky being exposed to death in such a fast and brutal way young. I deployed to Afghanistan when I was 19. So I got like a crash course in like, this is how fragile life can be. And then I used that to look at life as a bonus in time. Make the most of it with your kids. Make the most of it with your loved ones. And then when I got diagnosed with cancer, it's like, okay, so now my unknown has been shortened into the known. So now it's not a question of what if, it's a question of time management. So what's more important to me in time management? My wife and I argue. I'm not going to say we don't argue, but it's easier for us to move through bullshit arguments. Sorry if I can't swear.
No, you can swear.
But the little shit that you get stuck on in a relationship, we move past it very fast.
Yep.
There's not more than like a couple hours of like, we move through it because it's like, that's dumb. It doesn't mean anything. It's like, it's a moment, stupid. We move through it, and it's not like we are logically like, oh, let's get through this because I'm dying. We just perceive life differently now. It's a new outlook on it. And I could have two options. I could wallow and be angry and bitchy and pissy, and my kids could see the last remaining days that I have and the memories I'm building with them is dad let life crush him. Or I could be still happy and like whatever happens. Doesn't mean we've stopped fighting. I'm still doing every medical thing I can try. I'm going out for stem cells in Thailand. Like we're still fighting to stretch that time. There's not a give up.
Right.
But if it happens tomorrow, I have full peace with it. And I feel like I operate more and do better sick than I was when I was healthy because I have a true appreciation for it, where before I was so stuck in my day-to-day rat race. Now there's an appreciation where it's like, there are moments where I catch myself daily. I'm like, damn, today's a good day.
I love that because so many people, I've seen people, right? They're sick, they're dying, and they become victims of the circumstance.
Yep.
Always. And what you said something a moment ago, and that was about fighting, right? I often think about that. I tell my partner when we'll get in disagreements back and forth, right? And I think to myself, if this is it, if tomorrow morning I don't get to wake up, is this how we go out? Like, are we having this conversation? Like, was this really worth that? Like, granted, I want to be heard, you want to be heard, but let's move past these things quick because we love each other and we want the best. And we've got a little bit of a disagreement, but nobody, because I've gotten phone calls all of a sudden that someone you love and care about, they're not here the next day, right? So there's this finite amount of time that we have on this earth. And I love the fact that you're like, listen, I could have been a victim about this. I could have chosen to be here, but instead you're like, I'm going to be victorious. I'm going to win. And whether it's winning like by having myself here physically, which is what you're still working on, going to Thailand and doing the things with stem cells, or is it going to be that my impact was so big that it actually left such a legacy behind, and you're not doing it for your name, but you're doing it because you no longer want to see the suffering. And what I love about you, I just went back to 2014 when we first met. You were making armor that could be put into Humvees and into people's armor plates so that people wouldn't die, because you wanted to make sure that what occurred in Afghanistan did not continue to happen. And we would talk about war, and we would talk about the price of
We shot me
freedom
wearing those
and
plates.
life. I know.
We proved they work by me wearing it and shooting myself with a
Definitely.
I mean, we were dumb. That's not for your viewers. If you're gonna build an armor company, don't test your armor that way.
But you
yeah,
believed in it that much, right? Like
I
you
truly
believed in
believed
what
in
you're
what we were
doing,
doing.
and you really, truly wanted and are doing, not wanted to, but you're committed to impact.
Yep.
Like not just impact by taking a bullet, but like impact of what can happen in change in society. And that's what I've always noticed about you. You got this kind of this tougher exterior. The minute you meet you though, you're brilliant, but you're a huge teddy bear that wants to like really make this world a better place. And you're not just saying it, you're actually doing it, which is a big difference. And I mean, that is the capacity of what spiritual capitalism stands for.
They're ignition points, like what you do, like when we met, right? Ignition points. I always look at ignition points of like a forest fire doesn't start as a forest fire. There's an ignition point. There's a spark somewhere, where there's lightning, a cigarette, an ash, whatever, an ember that builds a fire and then it goes out of control. There's a reason forest fires help regrowth of forest, because you got to burn some of that damaged shit, get it out so the underbrush can grow and you get more healthy. Those ignition points happen all the time. And a lot of it, like we go to these events, like Nate and Lacey, if they're watching, like they do these breakfast paloozas. That's an ignition point. If you're an entrepreneur, you really want to make impact. I've met more successful entrepreneurs through those events than if you go and talk to like VCs or anybody else, because while the dollar success mark might not be there, the ignition transition, the impact to end users, the impact to consumers, the impact to business partners are on scale higher than the normal business models, is because there's that true, when we talk impact for profit, impact takes longer to build up, but I think it's more successful in the long run, if that's what we're focused on. And what I've always loved about you is when we started this, we immediately vibed on that in 2014, because we both had like, well, how do we help people? And you were like, at the time I had a friend that was suicidal, and I knew you for like 2 days, and you were like, I got something for you. And you gave me like an entire fucking box of Kratom. And you were like, this will help him, have him take it. And I was like, I'm not gonna have my buddy take this until I take it. And I started taking it. I called you and I'm like, hey, the hell did you give me? And you taught me about Kratom, but I don't know, that's how many hundreds of dollars that you just gave me of Kratom for a guy you never met. He meant something to me, and so you were like, let me help you through. Like,
yeah, we're in this together, man.
But
like this, we're all in this together.
That was an impact point, right? That's an ignition point of like, that either you have it or you don't. It's not something I haven't found anybody that's cultivated that.
Yeah.
You just find yourself there. Now, if you're out there and you're wondering if you could be that person, you are.
Yep.
Because if you're not capable of it, you're not worried about if you could be it.
It's interesting. So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself, most of our impact comes from our trauma.
Yep.
And one of the things I recognized a long time ago from working with some coaches and doing some of my own work, I'm like, man, I just don't want people to suffer. And I recognize that pain is necessary and it's the suffering that's optional, right? Like we don't have to suffer through things. And it's also not my job to control that suffering, but I will do my best to help mitigate that as much as possible, right? Am I going to do it perfectly? No. But every single major leader, entrepreneur, visionary that I find, most of their traumas, most of the things that we're trying to sometimes escape become also our battle cry at the same time. While your battle cry right now is to end a lot of this, to end the suffering with a lot of the mental issues that people are dealing with, right? That create those traumas by using blood flow. So if there's people that are listening to this and they're really vibing with what you're talking about, what can we do? Like we don't have your technology right now. Like you're working on it. And I know you're raising, how much you're raising right now?
50 millions are raised currently.
So you're raising 50 million.
Yep.
What can people do to create more blood flow in their bodies without having access to your technology?
So there are free technologies out there. So binaural sound waves are huge, right? They're very easy to get your hands on. There's an app on Apple, and I think it's on Android now too. It's Brainwaves 35 or 25. I'll get it to you. You can put it with the episode. It's a free tool. It's free. Go and get binaural beats. You need to put headphones on for it to work appropriately, but alternating frequencies of sound is
and that will create blood flow?
So it promotes blood flow. It doesn't rebalance you, but it promotes blood flow. The more blood flow you can promote, the better. There are things like, how often do you sit down and do a crossword puzzle? Now try to do that crossword puzzle while standing on a Bosa ball. Get your vestibular balance activated and throw a cough drop in. Activate a sense. Do the crossword puzzle. Simple, multi-step, complex process. To move blood in the brain, you got to put the body under stress, doing a complex task for a certain amount of time. Now, if you're not in Buddy, you're not in our headset, you're not in Axios, you're at your home, you're finding you're addicted. One of the best things you do is train body mind. So 80% of what we do is body mind. It's just natural behavior. It's pattern recognition. We just do it. How do you put on your pants?
I just do it. Yeah.
Right leg first, left leg first. Do you jump in both legs and shimmy them up?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? Like I put one on the one, then put on the other, and then pull them up.
But you naturally do. It's body mind.
Yeah, I didn't even think about it.
So let's promote blood flow. I want you to identify your patterns of behavior. How do you open a door? How do you open a cupboard? How do you brush your teeth? Identify what those body and mind mechanics are, write them down, and then do them opposite.
So we're talking mindfulness at this point in time.
Not even mindfulness. We're talking about actual blood flow promotion.
Okay.
A natural response. If we break that pattern of behavior, the body's going to have a physical response. So if you're right-handed, you brush teeth with your right hand, and you start on your right side, bottom left, upper right, top left, right? Well, let's go to your left hand and start on the left, and then your right, and up and down. And the next day, change it. Change pattern. Maybe you start on the right, so start on the left. You can identify your body behaviors. And you can put your body under stress by alternating those behaviors throughout the day.
This is something like, you see this a lot, and actually I'm a big fan of it, but like cold therapy, does that help?
I love cold therapy.
Does that help create blood flow?
We met in 2014. I was doing cold therapy. You thought I was crazy. I remember you and Mark giving me shit.
I don't recall that. That's interesting.
Okay, so I don't know if you remember, we were out in Murray, super snowy, and I came back in dripping wet because we went and jumped in the Jordanelle, me and Branden.
Oh, yes, right.
And you were like, what were you guys doing? I'm like, yeah, we went and jumped in the river. And you're like, are you insane? So, like, I love it. Now it's a fad. Everybody's doing it.
It is definitely. Yeah, it's everywhere.
But I've been doing it. So I've been doing cold therapy since I was in the military. So my platoon sergeant made us do it in 2010. So I've been doing it since 2010. There's 100 different theories and practices out there. I love Ashana. I love like what the Romans did with cold therapy. What happens is you get in cold therapy and your body goes into shock, right? So it's not a 3-minute thing. It's not a 5-minute thing. I look at it from a response, a physiological response. The moment your body thinks you're going to hypothermia, what does it do? You've done cold water.
Yes,
it pushes all the blood to your core.
Oh,
you get a sense of heat. You kind of heat flash.
Mm-hmm.
At that moment of heat flash is when we get out. It's when I get out. It's when I have my patients or my clients get out. Because at that moment, your body has to push blood back to your extremities because it forces all in. You get that heat flash. Mm-hmm. If you get out of that moment, you force it back out, you're going to get your dose of dopamine, your oxytocin, serotonin. You're going to get that flush, and that's your benefit. You want to go for mindfulness or mental resilience, and then do your 3 to 5 minutes. Push through that moment. Do your willpower. Focus on it. If that's your intent. If your intent is to have a physiological response, it's different for everybody. It's going to come down to your fat composition. It's going to come down to your blood type. It's going to come down to the size of your body. Smaller people that are really skinny are going to hit that point really quick. It could be within 10, 15 seconds. Big dudes like me, I mean, it's around a minute and a half. But once you hit it and you feel it, you feel it, it's time to get out. That's my moment. You don't have to go torture yourself for 5 minutes to get benefits. Some people can be in for less than a minute and get the same benefit as if you did it before. I love cold therapy.
We were talking about earlier about psychedelics. And what was interesting is when I have used psychedelics, right? We were talking about that a moment ago. All of a sudden I noticed my mind is sharper. I noticed that I can read. And we were talking about blood flow earlier. I'm able to read a little bit better. I'm able to retain more. And it's not for a long period of time. And you said, hey, listen, I've done plenty of psychedelics and I've went through all that process myself. But you noticed you were trying to get back to that moment in time of where that blood flow was optimal. So is psychedelics also creating lots of different blood flow from your research?
It's a temporary effect. So I'm working with Dr. Raj right now. He's one of the only doctors in the U.S. He's a psychiatrist out of Florida that is using psychedelics legally in studies in the U.S. And Dr. Raj and I did a podcast, but we talk about this as psychedelics have an effect of blood flow restoration, rebalancing blood flow in your brain for a period, and there's a half-life of fall off. You revert back to your damaged state. It's not a permanent rebalancing. So without the manual therapies, without doing the work, your body's not, it's like moving a muscle group, right? You have to do the work to reset and to get your baseline set. When it comes to psychedelics, you have a temporary rebalancing of blood flow, and then you have a half-life, it dies off. So like a lot of people experience the ceremony, they feel great. They come out of the ceremony, they're so awakened. They're like, oh, I feel amazing. And I'm focused, I'm going to change. And then you run into that person again in 3 to 4 weeks. Where are they at? I have not met someone that has had a permanent, life-altering, true, I shifted everything from one ceremony.
I have. I've definitely met a lot of people in the people I've stayed in contact with, but I would say not everybody,
But
right?
let me ask you a question on those people. Did they do work after the ceremony?
100%.
So it wasn't
Yeah,
the
it
ceremony.
wasn't. It was
the rebalancing blood flow and the work after.
Yeah,
that
so
made them a new person.
It's not just a ceremony.
Yeah.
So it's having the awareness that, oh my gosh, I'm seeing something different. I see myself from a different perspective,
and I'm doing the work.
Recognizing that there is no arrival, and I now have to go do something to be able to get the result. It's like somebody having a heart attack or something like that in the hospital, and they're like, oh, I had a heart attack. And they look at their diet, they look at all these things. And if they keep doing the same thing, they're gonna have the same results. But if they see that point as a moment in time, as that moment that they shifted,
I agree completely with you.
Then they move through that.
What I don't like is it's becoming a fad now. It's becoming something that's becoming mainstream. Everybody's becoming more accepting of it. And what we're seeing with that are the actors that play that instead of impact, they're focused on profit, or they're focused on ego, or they're focused on them.
Which can be way more damaging, which I see a lot in the West right now, and everywhere, not just the West. But if somebody's life path is not to say, like if they're serving, we'll say ayahuasca, just keep it simple.
Yep.
If their path is that is their path, that's what they've committed their life path to. They have teachers, they have practices, and they really stay in that space. Okay, that makes sense because that's what they do, right? They gave all their life to it, just like you. You've given all your life to this, to what it is that you're creating to help the world. But if someone's just doing this on the weekend, like, and they're just like, you know what, just take some of this stuff.
Or they're selling a false savior.
Correct.
Right.
There's way more damage in that.
I've met veterans that are like, I went and did a DMT ceremony and I thought my life would change.
Yep.
Okay. What did you do after?
There's no integration.
And they're like, well, it wore off. Well, wait a minute. What? You didn't do the work.
Right.
Right? Like you could put on the VR and you can sit there and choose not to move, choose not to climb, choose not to engage or do the thing, and then take it off and go, oh, I didn't feel anything. Well, that's psychedelics. The work has to follow. Causation does not happen without effect, right? You're not going to get it. You have to do the work. And that's at a fundamental level, psychedelics, I think, give you the opportunity to identify with a real comprehensive, because now you have good blood flow, identify and process to make a plan. That's what happens during these ceremonies. You make your plan. You have identified, I don't like this piece of me. I don't like what I do here. I don't like what I do here. I'm going to work on that when I leave. You've identified it because you've processed, and then you get out and you work on it.
Yep.
Amazing. There are some people that take it like a recreational drug. That, oh, great. It was an amazing weekend. I had such a good time. I saw machine elves, right? Like I went and I met Thor, and I'm like, did you?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, so for me
but then
personally,
they don't do work, and they wonder why they're stuck.
Correct. I utilize those experiences once a year. So the first time I ever went through these experiences, I decided to stop drinking. And that's what I did. I no longer drink, right? And when I when I have these experiences, typically what I do is I get what I would call my theme, right? It's the theme for the year. And I practice everything I can in that theme. Now, that's led me on some interesting experiences. It's led me down some dark paths, some good paths. It's not always been beneficial. Well, let me take it back. It's always been beneficial. It might not have been the results that I thought it was going to get from it, though. Yep. So it's the theme that comes from it, and it's the work that comes from it, right? Like it's the awareness, and from that awareness, then we have to step into the work. No different than utilizing your technology. You get the awareness, but like you said, I can sit there and I can say, oh, I've been told this is going to work. This is fantastic, but I don't want to move. Or maybe there's some points inside that experience with the video game where it becomes kind of scary, right? It's like, oh, I'm kind of scared at the moment. And you can either just stop and be like, hey, I'm bowing out, or keep pushing past that uncomfortability and doing the work itself.
Yep.
And so it's really amazing that you've been able to do that with this technology.
I wanted to duplicate the causation, those effects that I got when I did my own, psychedelics, or I did my own alternative therapies. One of them I did a fear therapy in 2016, right? Exposure to phobias or fears, and snakes being one of them. And I always, before we identified the blood flow issue, I was like, why are these the things that like incite true feelings? Because a lot of people are stuck with addiction, or they're stuck with PTSD. Is there's a numbness of response and action. They feel like they're in hell, that they live in like this, either they're 100 and they're over the top and they're reactionary, or they're dull. They're not living in like the middle where they feel good, where they're just, all right, I'm going with the flow. I'm in the river. I'm letting it take it where it takes me.
Yep.
And then when we identify the blood flow issue, I'm like, okay, so how do we promote the blood flow reintegration? How do we get blood flow rebalanced? How do we go through that process? But also after that, when you're identifying modalities, you're working through therapy, how do you utilize that blood flow now to comprehensively work through the task? So now I can comprehend it. How am I going to identify it? And so we use in our practice cognitive behavior therapy, because there's a behavioral model to identifying for yourself as you work through it to recover and heal and move through the trauma. And what we're doing with Buddy, we talked about like our 5-year goal with AI. This is where the AI comes in, is I want to replace that human therapist of the data endpoints, and the response of the human being will drive their cognitive behavior therapy in the environment. Because right now, the failing chink in the system is the therapist. We have a lot of and if you're a therapist watching this, you could be a great therapist. I'm not saying every single one of them out there is bad, but we all have to acknowledge there are actors in the therapy space who are wounded themselves, and they push their judgmental, what they believe the individual needs, a God complex, ego, and they are hurting their clients with assumptions instead of just healing the client with the data they are given. Our goal is to replace that piece with Buddy. Our Buddy is a biodynamic decision engine. That's why we named him Buddy, but it's your battle buddy. It's your companion through the process. We are getting to the point with AI. You've seen with ChatGPT and the voice, where you can't tell that differentiating if it's a human or not.
Not even close.
We're getting there with our behavioral models. We're going to get to a point where it's trained on cognitive behavior therapy and ERBT, emotional relief behavior therapy, and neuro-linguistic programming, and it's able to use your data, your input, what you are progressing through to treat you, because you're treating yourself. At the end of the day, you are training your AI model to treat yourself. And so you going through the process is you're going to get out of it what you put into it, but you'll be able to do it from a rational process to process, because your blood flow will be reintegrated, rebalanced.
And the future is now, and the future is amazing.
It is.
I am beyond grateful for what you're doing for people. Like, I'm beyond grateful that you are choosing to use this, your last breaths literally, to be able to help humanity move things forward. And obviously the Department of Defense would not be investing in this technology if they didn't believe in it. You wouldn't have, investors looking at this technology to be able to do this with you. If there's investors listening, or there's VCs listening, and they want to reach out and invest into your technology, or at least know more about it, how do they get hold of you?
So we're on Instagram. Axios VR is the handle, and it's AXIOS VR, or axiosvr.com. Or you can just email us at support@axiosvr.com. If you go onto the Instagram Instagram, our team will get it to me. They'll work it through, and it'll get to me or my chief revenue officer. We'll put you in touch with somebody. But Instagram's, I think, the easiest contact, because we have people that live monitor that.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. The other thing I ask people all the time is, what is it you want to be remembered for?
I want my kids to have a great long life with good memories with Dad. Everything after that's a bonus.
I love it, man. And what I know about you is, I know that's the experience they're having. There's no doubt about it. You play big, you go all in. You're showing these children how to live. You're showing them that, like, no matter what comes up in life, no matter what it is, whether it's something terminal, like we were talking about before with cancer, or if it's about changing the planet with something that people say is impossible, can't be done, this is how we always do it. You're showing them the exact opposite. Like, you're leading literally by example. And I really, truly appreciate that. And I know that they appreciate that too. And if there's anything you want to say to them, you're more than welcome to, because the greatest thing about technology is this stuff lives on forever.
Well, if they're watching this, you're all adopted. Just kidding. No, my kids, my kids know. I tell them every day. So we're not remembered by strangers, right? Go to a graveyard and go find someone that died in the 30s, right? Like, there's no flowers on those graves.
It's true.
You're forgotten. Who was the third king of England? Do you know off the top of your head?
No idea.
He was a king of a country. Me and you don't know his name.
Yep.
There's no level I can reach right now. Even Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are going to be forgotten in 200 years. Technology is moving too quick. They may have made the largest impact on humanity. Everybody knows their name. You can go to rural villages in Africa and they know who Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg is.
Sure.
Right? In 150 years, while technology continues to move forward, they will be forgotten in time. Just like, there's how many technologies came out in the early 1900s that were innovative for their time. Everybody knew the name, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
You will be forgotten. So make the most of it with the people that matter to you right now. Make sure that they have great memories. And if they share it with their kids, awesome. You made it to another generation. But you have to acknowledge you will be forgotten.
And that's beautiful, actually. It's beautiful in the fact that if you're going to be forgotten, then you might as well live this experience to the most that you possibly can, giving it everything you have.
For the people that matter the most to you.
I agree.
Don't forget your wife and your kids or your husband and your kids or whoever is the most important person in your life currently, chasing an impact or a desire to build a company. It breaks my heart here. Some of the billionaires that have regrets to get on their deathbed and that their largest regrets in life, they didn't share the time with their families. Like their families are broken, Larry H. Miller, I think, was quoted as that, like having the regrets on his deathbed. Like, you don't want to be that. Make the most of it. No one's going to care how much money. You can't take it with you. It's gone.
Facts.
This ride is over. Whatever's next is next, but you're taking it like how you took coming in this world. You're doing it alone. I hope I go out covered in blood like I came in it. I want to go out like a warrior. I told my wife, as I start dropping, we're going to go break Evel Knievel's jump record. Take me to a dirt bike. I'm jumping the Grand Canyon. We're going to go out fun. But, yeah, you're going to be forgotten. That's it, the ego thinking you're going to be remembered more by your close-knit group. But culture I set with my company, if I set a great culture, then that lives on through my company. And the impact my company makes doesn't have to live on in my name.
I love it, man.
Thank you for having me on, dude.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just gracious that you came on, showed us this technology so we can share it with the world, because I really do believe what it is that you're creating, what you're about, what you're committed to, what your mission is something that is definitely worthwhile. And it's something that people need to know about, because I do believe that it can shift and change their perspective, and it can change their family and their family's family. And we do that, we start to heal the world. And that's what's important
Agreed.
to me.
It's a domino effect.
All right, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.